This is an SM Media production.
Hi folks, and welcome to the debut episode of this season of The Rewind right here on SM Media. I'm Scott McPike. It's an absolute pleasure to be your host as always on the channel as we pilot this new show and see where we are in terms of looking back on the history of certain subjects in Scottish football. We will start the first episode by talking about the infamous dream team at Celtic, what happened in the summer of 1999 when Alan Mcdonald, the Celtic chief executive who had been promoted to his new position, brought in Kenny Dalglish to be the director of football and John Barnes as the new head coach. It was a fascinating period in Celtic history. To join me on this part of the Rewind, we are joined by From the Celtic Way, Anthony Haggerty. Anthony, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you onto the show. Thank you very much for joining me.
The pleasure's mine, Scott. How you doing? I hope you're well.
Yeah, I'm all good. Yeah, it's a fascinating period to look back on, and it's again, it's like you look back at kind of parallels with the kind of modern day. Like this is something you kind of see quite a bit, kind of like inexperienced managers coming in, and it just doesn't at times doesn't work out. It's happened at both Rangers and Celtic in recent years, but this whole period is just kind of a weird one, isn't it? It's just the club was in desperate need of a kind of progression into the 21st century. Was that fair to say?
Oh, very much so. And it was real turmoil at the club at that point. You know, they'd gone from the high of stopping Rangers' attempts at 10 in a row and losing their manager within like 24 hours of that title win, and Wim Jansen with the escape clause and all that had been revealed in his contract. And it just everything came crashing down round about them. And then Rangers brought in Dick Advocat, and we were seeing some real spending in Scottish football to take it to a different level and just accelerating away. And Celtic were kind of left in that slipstream. So as you say, they had to do something. But I think when you unveil John Barnes and Kenny Dalglish as the managerial dream team, you know, you're setting a high bar there, and you're setting them up to fail, really, aren't you? It's kind of putting anybody out there as some kind of dream team. You know, they were two high-profile, wonderful football figures in British football, and I think on the balance and on paper, everybody thought this should be a right good appointment. But you have to say, you mentioned it there, Celtic had tried with a rookie manager in Liam Brady, like 4 or 5 years previously, and that didn't work. So history should have told you that, you know, something nagging in the back of your mind. You go for a tried and tested, especially when Rangers had recruited someone like Dick Advocat, which was seen as a wonderful coup for them, and it was at that time. And in comes John Barnes, who's never coached a football team in his life, alongside Kenny Dalglish, who, he'd led Blackburn to the title and all that, but everybody said, well, he was backed by Jack Walker's millions.
Yeah, it was.
You know, can he manage? Well, you didn't really know, but these were the guys that were trusted to take on a Rangers team who's, you know, if you're talking about a career trajectory, was on the rise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing with that as well is obviously the famous thing with kind of Wim Jansen and Jock Brown and Fergus McCann. It just was a bit of Fergus McCann had said if he wasn't leaving, I was going to sack him anyway. That's a man who's just stopped winning the title.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's unbelievable. And then Dr. Joe, I don't think that was ever a long-term project. I think that was just basically bring somebody in for a year and then kind of get the project. Because Fergus, at this point, I think Fergus had always planned for 5 years.
Yeah.
So after 99, he was keen to...
Stopgap experiment was Dr. Joe, but Dr. Joe came in because he had a right good CV.
Yeah.
And they felt that maybe somebody with that experience could turn Celtic round. And, you know, Dr. Joe had his moments. He had a 5-1 win against Rangers. Brought in Lubomir Moravcik, you know, who was a fantastic footballer.
Yeah.
Celtic and, you know, and a fantastic footballer in Scottish football. So, but I think by the end of that year, Dr. Joe had enough. He was just, because he came out when he was 62. had they got him in when he was younger, he might have been able to do something.
Yeah.
But again, there was real turmoil there, wasn't there? And how you can take something so good and shattering Rangers' attempt at 10 and turn it into something so bad for a couple of years. Only Celtic, I think, could do that.
Mm-hmm.
The club has previous for taking the badness out of something great.
Yeah.
But, that's what happened.
Alan McDonald comes in as a newly appointed chief executive. Obviously, in the summer of '99, Fergus McCann had left, and kind of Dermot Desmond had took over his shares and things like that. Did you know much about Alan McDonald? And obviously, he's from Ayr, where I'm from. I know a bit about him, but what was the kind of impression at the time when he was appointed the chief executive?
I don't think many people were too impressed. What did a man from BAE know about Celtic?
Mm-hmm.
No one was he brought in just because of the company he kept, and we spoke about it off here, or just because he played a good game of golf with a few people who I think are a bit prevalent to this day. Because I know Dermot Desmond loves his golf, doesn't he? So,
yeah,
a lot of deals are stuck on the golf course. So but I think it was a left field appointment as CEO. Let's be honest, but most CEOs tend to be left field, don't they? If they're not promoted from within, they're kind of left field, and they come from a background which is not normally associated with football. But CEOs, you'll never want to hear CEOs when they're announcing the figures or at the AGM. If they stay quiet and let the football side of the business take care of itself, then you're quite perfectly happy with your CEO. But when they start to become personalities and say stuff, and I'm not saying that Alan McDonald was particularly guilty of that, but sometimes it's the kudos of being the CEO of a football club that drives these guys, especially a club like Celtic, world renowned.
Yeah. McDonald, obviously, I think it's fair to say, was a bit of a golf chum of Kenny Dalglish. And Dalglish, I think he'd got to the stage. I think Blackburn had kind of revitalised his love of football. I think Liverpool, I think it just became too hard for him personally. But Newcastle, he didn't have a great spell. Obviously, Barnes was there as a coach, and was it fair to say that I think McDonald wanted him as manager, Dalglish, and then the kind of compromise was bringing Barnes in, and kind of Dalglish would oversee him?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the. I did a big interview with John Barnes in the Celtic Way, and he said that the only ally he had when he turned up at Celtic was Kenny Dalglish, because Alan McDonald and the board were very sceptical of his appointment. They thought it was a high-risk appointment, which he would. As alluded to earlier, he was a rookie manager. He hadn't managed the football team in his life. So, and John Barnes said a strange thing. He said that he spoke to Sheffield United and he spoke to Celtic, and the only offer that he had on the table for his first managerial job in football was Celtic.
Yeah.
That's
crazy,
astonishing.
Yeah.
That's absolutely astonishing, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
If your first managerial job in football and that offers from Celtic, I mean, a different time, I guess, but it wouldn't happen now. But I mean, that's quite an incredible thing for John Barnes to say, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's that thing as well. I think it was McDonald was desperate to have Dalglish there, and I think, is it fair to say maybe a kind of fanboy thing of like bringing a legend back who had obviously had his time at Liverpool, but people forget like Dalglish was Dalglish not employed with Rangers at this point as well? Like it's a weird one. It's a weird one to think like Dalglish was. I'm sure he was a scout, like a South American scout or something for Rangers. To go from that to then be the Celtic director of football in the space of 2 years, like I think Dalglish is one of the very few who could get away with that, to be honest.
Oh, very much so, yeah. Ken Dalglish is revered at Celtic.
Mm-hmm.
He's revered for what he did as a player. He was a 10 out of 10 player every day of the week. As a manager and a coach, I think that leaves a lot to be desired, as we'll talk about during this time. But, as a player, you cannot hold a candle to Kenny Dalglish. So he still had a lot of credit in the bank with Celtic supporters, despite the fact that he had kind of taken on this role with Rangers, as you say. But how much he actually did for Rangers is kind of anybody's guess, because it was never really elaborated on or expanded upon, was it? So
no. But like you think about like Dalglish, and I think he's still got the reputation at this point as an astute operator. He brought in some terrific players at Blackburn. I think that goes under I know he was backed very much so by Jack Walker, but he signed some great players in that time for relatively low money. But there was scepticism by the support with the rookie manager. But McDonald defended that by the infamous quote of, "I have a rather large insurance policy," and Kenny Dalglish. Did that kind of lay the kind of scepticism with the support at the time of, like, even McDonald is saying, like, if this goes wrong, basically Kenny's there, kind of thing. That's what it feels like. That's what you look at, and that's what you read into that and think, like, if this goes wrong, blame Kenny, not me.
How do you feel if you're John Barnes?
I know.
And he said that at the AGM, didn't he? And that's a total. I think that Barnes has said since that he felt that was a total undermining of his confidence, you know, and what he could bring to the table. And he got the feeling that they were just kind of putting up with John Barnes because Kenny wanted him there. And I think even John Barnes used the words, "I'm nobody's puppet. I wasn't a puppet manager. I'm going in there to be my own man." But from the get-go and from day one when he was unveiled, that's what he was fighting against. He was fighting against a board, and particularly Alan McDonald, who was like, "Well, I wanted this guy, but you've had to come along as well on the say-so of Kenny Dalglish," you know. So, and I think that's a really, I mean, see, if you're within your rights, if you're John Barnes, you should probably have walked away then and said, "You know what, this is not for me. If this is the way you're going to treat me." And I think, but you believe as a football manager, or you think you can make a difference, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Regardless if the odds are stacked against you, and they were stacked against them heavily. Rangers had a good team, they were spending money like it was going out of fashion. But you say to yourself, if I can implement my ideas, fine. But with the board not entirely sure about you, you know, alarm bells should be ringing, shouldn't they?
Yeah, and it's absolutely, and that's the thing. And like, he does have a way he wants to play that infamous 4-2-2-2 formation. But you kind of think about that, and you think, like, obviously we'll touch on his signings in a minute, but the first thing that screams out to me is that is a lot. If you're going to play this 2-2-2 with no width, your fullbacks are going to be in for a hell of a shift every game. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a really inventive way of playing, but does it work in Scottish football? Even then, I think that would have been my scepticism with it.
I don't think you needed it in Scottish football, but it was a kind of, as you say, it was a refreshing change to what Scottish football had been used to, and probably a lot of teams now are maybe not so much adopting the 4-2-2-2, but some of the ideas that John Barnes was coming up with, I think in that sense he was revolutionary and ahead of his time possibly, but maybe just the way you see football played now. But he just made a big deal about it, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
A big deal was made of it on his behalf, and you know, he kind of tied himself in knots with it, the whole 4-2-2 formation. And I admire the fact that he tried something new, but as you say, it probably wasn't needed in Scottish football. But probably you look at it now and you think he was onto something back then.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess football supporters' capabilities and sensibilities, it just wasn't for them. So it was heavily criticised. Whereas now it's more normal to see teams adopt maybe a 4-2-2-2 or any kind of variation on a similar theme. And as you say, your fullbacks are in for a hell of a shift, but now you just need to look at fullbacks playing inverted, all that kind of stuff. So I think the nub of an idea was there, Scott, tactically with John Barnes, but I guess that the actual execution of the idea was maybe not as refined as it possibly could have been. But he was certainly, I think, tactically, he was a wee bit ahead of his time in that sense.
Yeah, he absolutely was, and that's the thing you mentioned there about obviously fullbacks. It's a modern day thing now, fullbacks pushing forward. But at the time, it was perceived as this massive kind of risk. And you think about the kind of way. Obviously, the two up front were going to be Larsson and Viduka, and Moravchik was going to be kind of. But Craig Burley was mentioned as being a holding midfielder. Now, Craig Burley's a terrific player. Craig Burley is not a holding midfielder.
No, and Craig Burley will tell you that himself.
Yes.
That's that led to kind of unrest with John Barnes, and Craig Burley was particularly vociferous as a person, as a player, and as a pundit.
Yes.
Which he is now, you know. So that was never going to align well with the two of them. When you have such an important player like Craig Burley and what he brought to the table, he was never an anchor midfielder, was he?
And he was so important to the Celtic teams before that. Like, he was player of the year a couple of years before.
Correct. You know, and the glue that was holding everything together was Larsson and Lambert.
Mm-hmm.
And the common denominator amongst them was they were two of the highest paid players at the club.
Yeah.
They were happy, but players started to kind of find out what they were on, what the Rangers players were on, and there's all sorts of murmurings of discontent. And when you have that in a dressing room, you have a powerful voice like Burley, allied to guys like Viduka, who was an important player for Celtic then, and felt that wasn't commensurate in his worth. The financial compensation that he was getting. So, when for all that bubbling away, John Barnes is dealing with that, and in any dressing room, you're dealing with fragile egos and personalities at times. And for any kind of manager with experience, that would be difficult enough. But John Barnes, this is John Barnes' first job, and he's walked into this dressing room with us. It's really, really fractured, isn't it? No one's denying or doubting Celtic players in that team had ability. But when you start off from the base level of there's such a disparity in wages with certain key players, it's only going to go one way, isn't it?
And I think a big thing for Celtic at this point as well is that Barnes gets heavily backed, and I think that's a big point as well, because the years before, famously with Fergus, I mean, Fergus McCann gets booed for not spending money, and there was this myth of Celtic were tight with money, Celtic wouldn't spend money, but this summer they do spend a lot to set the Scottish transfer record by Niall Berkovic. A gem in there, and Stilian Petrov, who likes a Tbilisi shite later on we'll talk about, who was what we just said. There's this thing of with Celtic at this point of the biscuit tin model that was, the myth was still there, but Larsson gets a new contract, and Celtic would that have been a big turning point for the fans at this point, that there is ambition there and they're beginning to spend the money?
I think there was ambition, in bearing in mind the backdrop of this is they're looking at Rangers.
Yeah.
They're trying to, Ange said it when he came in that, you build a team, but you don't want to look over at your neighbour's garden. Celtic were constantly looking over at the neighbour, or the fence to their neighbour's garden, and that was the problem. So they had to be seen to be keeping up with the Joneses, as they say, or keeping up with Rangers, and who were just, they were just right. We were competing in all fronts with clubs in Europe for players. So re-signing Larsson on a good deal was a great piece of business. You've got a Champions League winner and Paul Lambert in the team. You've got him on a good deal as well. And then, as you say, they started to splash the cash on players. I mean, the diamond and all that rough being Stilian Petrov. And, people can say what they like about John Barnes, but he did bring in Stilian Petrov.
Yeah, he did.
Stilian Petrov went on to be a tremendous servant for Celtic. John Barnes didn't see the best of him, but I think John Barnes can afford himself a wry smile and say, well, I brought him.
Yeah, and Berkovic was a big signing at the time as well.
Berkovic was a huge signing as well. And again, another one of those right player, wrong time.
I think that's fair, yeah. I think Anil, if Anil would got him.
John Collins is another one that would say. Right player, wrong time. But Berkovic was a talented footballer, as he showed those two goals at Ibrox and the 4-2 defeat ultimately. But Lambert gets his face smashed in, teeth and all that, and they were without him for a while after that. But Berkovic was a really good footballer, but another one who had a strong voice. And, you just say to yourself, well, the Celtic at that point were a splintered and fractured team of individuals, not a team.
Yeah.
They'd sublime talent in lots of positions, but there was just no cohesiveness about them or unity about them. And that kind of showed. And guys like Tbilisi, I mean, everybody, you get players like this that come in and they're a cult hero for all the wrong reasons,
Yeah.
Really wasn't a great defender, but, the Celtic took a chance. And then Raphael, who wasn't signed on Barnes, so he was brought in to show as a statement of intent by Celtic, £6 million, and the whole kind of, they watched him on DVDs and stuff.
Yeah.
Scott, I'm sure you and I could be made to look good in a football park with your greatest hits, and if you sign him on the back of that. But Barnes, when I spoke to him in that interview, said, look, I was asked my thoughts, and I said, if that's what Celtic want to do, fine, because the big thing was that they were going and signing a Brazilian was a statement of intent. Wasn't Raphael's fault that it turned out, they premised it on the fact that he was a Brazilian international, but I think it was under 23 and he played in the Olympic team or something. Is that
Something
right?
like that, yeah, I think
Wasn't
it's one
on a
game.
big day, yeah. You know, so that they're all there's extenuating circumstances for this period in Celtic's history, which you're only starting to learn more about now, as opposed to back then when everything was just the blame was laying solely at the feet of John Barnes.
And was there a thing as well? The start of the season's brilliant, 9 wins for 11 games, but Rangers, as you mentioned, that 4-2 game, Celtic go 2-1 up, but Rangers just kind of turn it on in the second half, helped with that penalty, obviously. But was there still this positivity that this was a kind of strong start? Because 9 wins from 11 games, I mean, that's really good form.
Oh yeah, I mean, and they were playing some stuff. I mean, in John Barnes' reign, they battered Aberdeen 5-0, 6-0, and 7-0.
Yeah.
Right, so for every yang, there's a yang. You know what I mean? But they were playing some good football. They were scoring some goals, but it was the games that mattered that they just fell short on.
Yeah.
And that's no slight on John Barnes, because lots of people fell short on those games. Tommy Burns' team in particular played wonderful football, entertaining Celtic for Celtic fans. Still talk about Tommy Burns' team, but they came up short against Rangers, who just at that period in history during the 90s had better team and had better players because they were spending a lot of money. And you know, it tends to work out that way, doesn't it? If you've got the most money, you buy the better players, you end up being the better team. And Celtic were getting there, clawing it back slowly but surely, but just not at that stage. They could lay a glove on them, but not land a knockout blow. And Rangers always kept them at arm's length.
Yeah, and there's an interesting point as well. I want to get your thoughts on. You're probably a really good person to ask about this. Like the press, I don't think the press ever took to him from the get go. What do you think was the kind of reason for that? Would you think it was more that this kind of outsider who hadn't been in Scottish football, or was it more because the impression was never there that Barnes he wasn't, although he's became a very outspoken person in recent years, like at the time he didn't really give the media much, and we know in Scottish football if you don't do that, you don't really last long.
I think he never played the game, let's put it that way. He was accused of being aloof and introverted, and as you say, he didn't give the media much. I mean, he's since denied that, but I think it's hard, you know, when you're parachuted in and you're propelled into this, the goldfish bowl, or this swirling vortex of two Glasgow clubs who are only ever going to win the league. Finishing second is not an option; it's failure.
Yeah.
And your every move, your every word, everything that you do is scrutinised to the nth degree. I don't think Barnes quite caught what it meant when he walked in, and just gets stuck in that maelstrom that surrounds it. The media being part of it as well. And I don't know, I mean, I'm sure he'd spoken to Kenny Dalglish, but I'm not sure if guys like Kenny Dalglish and Alan McDonald prepared them fully for what he was walking into. Because it's, and he says himself, he is quite an extroverted guy, but he came across, and that was the image that he portrayed, and he did get a bad rap and a bad jam because of that, press-wise. And I think when you start from day one and the people that you are employing you don't trust you, that gets your heckles up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then you have a distrust of everything and everyone. And then when the media are firing questions at you and why are you doing this and why you then there's that kind of unhealthy mistrust of everybody, and I remember John Barnes saying to me as well that he phoned his wife at the time, or his then girlfriend, and said, don't move house, this ain't going to last long. That was not long into his tenure in that. And he said that to his partner at the time. I think it was his wife. I'll need to check back, but whoever was his partner, he advised him not to move to Scotland because he didn't see it lasting long. So see, when you're getting that kind of vibe very early on, doesn't really bode well. And I think everything kind of came on top of him at that point. And and the media, they are what they are. It's the media is the media the world over. You got the English media crucify their national managers, don't they? The Italian media crucify club managers, and Scotland, and particularly Glasgow, is no different. You know, it's just a football hotbed. It's just a city that loves its football, and if you're not performing, then you will get criticised. But as you mentioned there, Barnes actually was kind of performing.
Mhm.
And he came away with an interesting stat that in his short 9 months, I think it was 9 months, 8 or 9 months, he actually had a higher win game percentage ratio than Steven Gerrard had in 3 years at Rangers. But nobody's interested in that kind of stat, are they?
No.
And he was pointing that out to me when I spoke to him, and I thought, wow, that's So I guess when he felt that there was no longevity in it, and he was making phone calls like that to his family to tell them not to move north of the border, then you say to yourself, what makes you stick it? And I think going back to what I said, you think you can make a difference. No, John Barnes has had thick skin all his life.
Yeah. Oh,
He's put
definitely.
up with all sorts.
Mhm.
So I guess this was just another layer of criticism that he's handled it all his life.
Mhm.
I'm talking about racism, the full bit.
Yeah.
Right? So this was just another part of another facet and strand to John Barnes' life that he probably thought, I've handled worse than this. I
Yeah.
can do this. And I think that's the day. I think deep down he was a football man that wanted to make a difference at a big club.
Yeah.
He was a wonderfully gifted footballer, and it doesn't necessarily translate that you'll be a wonderfully gifted coach. But I think I believe after talking to him that that's what he felt, that he could make a difference, and he wanted to make a difference because he loved football, and he had a chance in a lifetime and a once in a lifetime opportunity at a huge club as your first managerial job.
Yeah, absolutely as well. And I don't think this helped in particular. The away game against Lyon in the UEFA Cup is famous for Henrik Larsson breaking his leg. It wasn't just a loss of a massive player, but as you mentioned there, Larsson was the heartbeat of the club. And would it fair to say that this is a kind of spiral of events for that kind of this starts for you? Because losing Larsson, losing that pivotal person is just a massive blow for the whole club. And Barnes, it was huge for Barnes as well.
See, his luck goes, Barnes had none.
Yeah.
He had none. No, he lost Larsson, and I think a couple of weeks later he lost Lambert, didn't he?
I think, yeah.
But with the chronology, they played Lyon. Larsson broke his leg, was out for the rest of the season, and then they go to Ibrox and they lost the 4-2 game, which was
Lambert, yeah.
And Lambert had the knee in the face from Alberts and lost teeth and the jaw get shut. So, as I referred to earlier, he lost the glue that was holding that team together.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're looking at that dressing room, and I think it's nothing short of anarchy now.
Yeah, where's the character? Where's the...
And guys are, that dressing room are selfish. Larsson and Lambert were the consummate pros in there.
Mm-hmm.
So people, if anything else, guys like Burley and those around them, you watch these two and, all right, they're in it for the team. Things aren't going well personally for certain individuals, but these two guys are consummate team players, do it for the team. So when you lose that influence, then you have a team, you have a fractured unit of players who are now thinking, well, I'm unhappy, and then they're unhappier because the beating heart and the fulcrums of the team are now out of it. Mm-hmm. So now they feel emboldened that they can say stuff and do stuff, and and Barnes is competing with that. And like everything else, for any manager, it's results, isn't it? It's results, and ultimately results were Barnes' undoing. I'm not negating anything that Barnes did. It was a crazy 9 months in Celtic's history, of which Barnes has to take responsibility, because he was in charge.
Yeah, and his solution to the Larsson injury was to bring in an old friend. Ian Wright was the kind of short-term replacement. Now we think about Ian Wright, terrific goal scorer, absolutely brilliant goal scorer. This stage in his life, he's not the Ian Wright of old, and it looks like a desperate man going to his friend to help him out. But I mean, Ian Wright at this point is his football's kind of past. He was at Nottingham Forest and loan, that didn't work out. It was more kind of it was in the television career. So his kind of television career had took off at that point. But what did that kind of say, like losing Larson and bringing in Ian Wright? No disrespect to him, but he was past it.
It smacked of an old pals act, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Yeah,
it was right. You cannot get away from that. But I just think that he thought he would get some kind of renaissance out of Ian Wright. He'll come and fall in love with the Celtic supporters. You know, the Celtic Football Club, it's an institution. You know, it will get the football juices flowing for Ian Wright again. And I think there was method in the madness, but it did turn out to be, you know, I think Ian Wright, I don't know how many goals he scored, but
I think he scored in his debut.
Yeah, scoring against Kilmarnock, I believe. You know, and again, you know, you talk about right players, wrong time. They got Ian Wright when he was basically past his sell-by date, didn't they?
Yeah.
And I think he just thought that Ian Wright could come, and I genuinely think he came as well for his influence in the dressing room to give it a lift, because I think it was real doom and gloom there. And I remember I was working at the Record at the time, and when Ian Wright was unveiled, the journalist who covered it, I can't remember who it was, but I asked him what the press conference was like, and he said it was like an audience with Ian Wright. So I think he was brought in to lift that dressing room as well.
Yeah.
That's a dressing room at low ebb, and a character and a wonderful footballer in his day coming in, somebody who could maybe command respect, but also lift some of the kind of dark grey clouds that were hovering over it at that time, as you say, with the loss of Larson. Maybe it was twofold, and if you could get a tune out of him, then he'd won a watch. You know, but as we all saw, it was, you know, it did smack of a kind of old pals act and possibly desperation. But I don't dispute the logic. But you know, as you saw when Ian Wright turned out for Celtic, his appearances were limited, weren't they? And the goals didn't exactly flow.
Yeah, and you think about Barnes as well at this point as well. Like he's new in a job. It's his first management job, and you do need that backing from the guy that's brought you in. And I mean, there's the famous thing, and I don't know if you remember this in Only an Excuse. They were doing a thing that Jonathan Watson does, the impression of John Barnes, and he says at this time, and this has stuck with me ever since. He says, "If I need any help, I go to Kenny's office and ask his secretary what golf course he's on." That was the myth at the time. That was getting publicised at the time. Was there this thing about Dalglish at the time that he was kind of absent? He wasn't as involved as people thought he would be. Like, what do you remember about that round about this time before December?
Yeah, I remember that sketch you're talking about, and you know, these things don't come into the public domain without a reason or without a truth to them, you know. And everybody knew that Kenny Dalglish liked his golf, you know, La Manga and all that kind of stuff. And
we'll get into that.
And I just think, you know, part of me does think that Kenny Dalglish was maybe an absentee landlord, and John Barnes had to take all the flack and all the criticism and everything that was coming in. I don't know if John Barnes helped himself in that respect, but you know, John Barnes is no stupid. John Barnes knew you had to win football matches. You know, at the end of the day, and I think but I don't think he realised what he was walking into, and also the competitive nature of the club in the same city, who were streaking away from them, and at that point, and doing all sorts of things and signing all sorts of players, and I just think that he, again, I go back to it was his love of football that brought him to Celtic, and the fact that it was such a huge opportunity for your first job. And I think if he knew then what he knew now, he'd maybe not have came to Celtic.
No.
You know, and you'd be quite right to say you're right. You shouldn't have. But you know, guys you feel that you can make a difference. If you're a coach newly starting out, you want to impress. So you'll maybe put up with a lot more than what you would have when you become an experienced head coach.
And it's that thing as well, and I think this is interesting. You've kind of compared it to the likes of Tommy Burns and things like that. Like when you get an offer like that to manage a massive club, you might never get it again.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's that thing, and we've seen it later on with kind of Mowbray and things like that. Like, you don't get those opportunities all the time, and
you've got to step onto that train when it comes along at the right time. And also you've got to know when to get off at the right platform and station as well. But you're right, I don't think an offer like that ever came along again for John Barnes. He managed the Jamaican national team. He managed Tranmere, didn't he? I think it took him 8 years to get another managerial job because people saw him as damaged goods. This and that he get badly burned by the Celtic experience, which is a shame for John Barnes personally. But yeah, in the conversation I had with him, he still loves the club. He still loves, and he still loves Liverpool, and he still loves Everton, and he said he loved it because of the supporters. The supporters were still incredibly kind to him.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I think in the years that have elapsed since John Barnes' tenure at the club, I think their understanding and their knowledge of just what exactly went on. No, I don't think there's many managers could have coped with that, Scott, to be honest.
No, I don't think there is either. Results do pick up in December. Barnes wins Manager of the Month and Viduka wins Player of the Month. There's a lot of positivity that the turn of the millennium could be more positive, but a January break in Portugal, I think, reveals that discontent you were talking about in the dressing room. There's problems with Viduka and Moravcik. There's just this massive discontent. Do you remember that at the time?
I remember the reporting of it, yeah, because Viduka had said that he'd been promised a transfer by the CEO, Alan Mcdonald. It's a verbal agreement, basically. I think Moravcik was complaining about the money that he was on in comparison to and others. I'm assuming that Lambert and Larsson being those, and I think Burley was kind of just unhappy at just John Barnes, So so I think they went to Portugal, and I think they all started fighting.
There was a big rammy.
There was a rammy, as you should. Yeah, there was a rammy, and John Barnes confirmed that, and he just said it just got out of hand, and then he unbeknown to him, he didn't know about Mark Viduka's agreement with Alan McDonald. So this was all reported, and all hell started breaking loose, and Rome was burning. And John Barnes went to McDonald and said, "Mark Viduka said this. Please tell me it's not true." And Alan McDonald said, "Well, actually, it is. I've promised them if somebody comes in with a bid of £3 or £4 million, they can go." John Barnes like, "Why would you do that? He's our top scorer. He's scoring goals. He's happy, starting to play well." And then he was talking about Moravcik, and then he said that he appealed to the Celtic board to put all the Celtic players on the same basic wage, and then it would be altered on a sliding scale for players like Lambert and Larsson.
Yeah,
have them all on parity, and that fell on deaf ears. But I think there was a huge disparity with the likes of Moravcik and various others in the team. And when you have players who find out what others are on, it's always going to lead to unrest, isn't it? But that Portugal trip was infamous for, as you say, the rammy that took place. And John Barnes didn't shy away from it. He was like, "Yeah, it did happen." You think maybe you try and cover it up, but he was actually quite refreshingly honest and open about it. And he went into kind of the details about it, and Viduka being the big talking point of that trip.
What about his coaching staff at this point? Like Eric Black had obviously come in with him, and Terry McDermott, who had been given the title, was it social convener or something? Like, was that? Do you think that helped him? Like, I know Eric Black, obviously, he knew Scottish football. Do you think maybe an experienced kind of figure like a Tommy Burns would have maybe helped him and come in at that point?
I think Black was touted as a coach going places, a young coming and had great ideas as well, and so I don't know, maybe he was, but I think Eric Black was a good card marker for him, filling him in with stuff, but I think the mood music and the PR surrounding Terry McDermott as social convener, again, that smacked of a job for the boys. And just Terry, what is your role? Are you collecting money for nights out? Basically, is that are you trying to so and that's no slick. Terry McDermott was another one who was a fantastic footballer.
Yeah,
but you look at his tenure, or his kind of employment at Celtic, and you think, what did you actually do? What did you bring to the table? And I don't think anybody before or since has been able to enlighten me what he actually did. I'd like to think that Terry McDermott had a good coaching knowledge from being a fantastic footballer, but it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't always necessarily translate. But you look at Terry McDermott and you think, that's a guy that got paid probably large sums of money to not bring much to the table. You know, Black was different. Black had done his coaching badges at Largs and the SFA and was seen as a young up-and-coming, you know, good technical football coach. So I could understand that. Maybe John Barnes needed somebody, I guess you'd say, with more experience and someone who was more aware of the Celtic thing, you know, like a Tommy Burns, like, you know, like a Danny McGrain.
Yeah.
But I mean, surely that person or the conduit should have been Kenny Dalglish. But then go back to how often was Kenny there? John Barnes was there. So, you know, Kenny Dalglish should have been that person.
Absolutely, yeah. And as you say, when you've got an absentee landlord and you've got a manager, again, it's the earliest, like, mentally, he must have been pickled. Like, it must have been like what he's dealing with, what the big personalities. I mean, Mark Viduka is a big personality. I don't think, like, you've just got that kind of distance. And as we say, they come back from the Portugal trip and league campaign resumes and Celtic draw with Kilmarnock and then throw away a 2-goal lead to lose at home to Hearts. And I think obviously the turning point, the untenable position becomes after the Inverness game. But when you're 2-0 down to Hearts and you lose 3-2, I mean, the fans were disgruntled then, and I think that was a massive turning point for a lot of the support who had, I think, obviously you don't want a manager to ever fail, particularly at a club like Celtic, but when you see that and you see the kind of gutless performance of losing 3 goals, it never ends well for that point.
Yeah, when you're chipping away 2 goal leads to Hearts at home, then serious questions are getting asked, and then again, all that, you know, they cheat into that. He's lost the dressing room. I don't think John Barnes ever gained the Celtic dressing room.
Yeah, it
was the definite case of paradise lost from the moment John Barnes stepped into the manager's shoes, which is a shame for him. And, you know, and it was reflected in the fact that he struggled to get, you know, future employment down the line after he left Celtic, and the whole experience had burned him a wee bit. But again, he still loves the club. But, you know, that Hearts game was quickly followed by the Inverness debacle, wasn't it? And John Barnes admits himself that once you lose to Inverness in the Scottish Cup, you have to get sacked. There is you're not coming back from that. The circumstances surrounding it, again, with Mark Viduka being the protagonist and Eric Black saying to him after the first half, you know, you're just running around and you're not trying. And Viduka has taken that to mean that Eric Black was calling him a cheat, and he has lost it. And again, that dressing room, holy hell breaks loose in that dressing room, which leads to Viduka throwing his boots across the floor and I'm not going out for the second half. And, you know, and see, when you hear that story, I can't remember or recall another instance of a player refusing to come out. I mean, literally refused to come out to play the second half, told the manager that's it, wanted to fight with people. And I get that players have fragile egos, but my goodness. You know,
and that's the thing. Eric Black has come out since and said that he'd done that to provoke a reaction from Viduka.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the reaction he got. Like he thought he was going to get, and that speaks of this lack of kind of understanding in the dressing room at this point. Like, not that I'm saying Viduka's totally wrong, but Black should have known.
Yeah, I mean, probably not wise, but if you're, you know, I think at that point, were they losing? They
were 2-1 down at half time. Yeah, 2-1.
Yeah. So usually in those kind of circumstances, if you're heading for a humiliating exit, you would pick on a big personality and say, get the finger out, or to make an example, to make some kind of, you know, statement type halftime team talk, you know, and as you say, get the reaction, well, come on, let's show them. But Mark Viduka's taken it personally and made it all about him, and that's what the Celtic team was about back then. It was all about the individuals.
Could you tell that night? Obviously, it finished with 3-1 Inverness. Could you tell that night that the dream team was over?
Oh, that was it. That was the ultimate nightmare for him. He had to go.
Mm-hmm.
And also as well, I mean, the headline that followed
Yeah.
in the tabloid, Super Cali goes ballistic, Celtic are atrocious. They were, in terms of the small pool that we live in, but they were a laughingstock, Celtic.
Mm.
And things can only go so far before, people have to step in and take charge and make kind of decisions and say, right, enough's enough. And that was John Barnes' idea, wasn't it? It was just that was he'd reached the end point. And to be fair to John Barnes himself said that when the end came, it was a relief. And he doesn't hide from the fact that was a terrible result. Inverness were in the first division at that time, weren't they? The Championship, as it's now known. And they gave Celtic a whooping at Celtic Park.
And they're only like 5 or 6 years from being founded, like as merging together kind of thing. Like it shows you it's a massive result and one that I think it's untenable at this point. But the director of football, you would think he would be in a stand for a game like that. Do you remember where he was?
No, I don't remember. Where was he?
He was in a golfing scouting holiday in La Manga.
I was in La Manga. Well, I was going to say La Manga, but he was forever in La Manga, so I thought maybe he was somewhere different. But yeah, and again, that just sort of, it was kind of microcosmic of the time at Celtic, wasn't it? That just seemed to be riddled with unprofessionalism and just rank bad amateurism and the day-to-day running of the football club, which stretched from boardroom level down to players and the supporters then turning on the team, the unrest, and it was just prevalent at the time amongst everybody.
Dalglish obviously summoned back to take control of that situation, and he has meetings with the staff and Mcdonald and the chairman at the time. But it's announced the day after that John Barnes, Eric Black, and Terry McDermott will all leave the club. Was there doubts that Dalglish would stay on at this point? Was there fans wanting Dalglish away at this point, or was there?
I think there was fans just wanting anybody other than John Barnes, to be fair, because they just had their fill of John Barnes and they just weren't enjoying what they were watching. So anybody coming in to steady the ship, and as I say, Kenny still had some credit in the bank with the Celtic supporters, and he proven himself as a manager. So if he could sort of steer the ship to the end of the season and take it from there and see what would transpire, then surely something would have to give. As it turned out, it did. But I just think that the whole Barnes episode left a sour taste in everybody's mouth, the fans, Barnes to a certain extent, although he's now a bit more, he speaks more openly about it and he's a bit more philosophical about it latterly. But it was, in years to come, they'll do fascinating case studies on this, won't they? They'll be like university papers or like theses written about this time and the time when Celtic blew 10 in a row under Neil Lennon and stuff. There'll be a compare and contrast exercise kind of thing, with the unrest and all that. I just think there's kind of similar themes running through it in Celtic's history at certain times, but and exacerbated by the fact that Rangers were doing so well, and it was that kind of. You did feel for Barnes, but again, Celtic put him in that position, and he said himself, it's almost as if they put him in a position to fail.
And Dalglish, obviously, after that, he kind of puts the blame in the media as well, like saying like the media never gave him the support, and that was a famous time that Dalglish was doing the press conferences in Baird's Bar and things like that. Like, just strange, isn't it, to think about that? It's so strange to think.
And that's where a lot of Celtic supporters were conflicted with Dalglish as well, because I think Kenny Dalglish took Celtic to a position in that point in time that no football club should ever be in. I was on a plane to Florida covering the Scottish Claymores, and Dominic Keane, former Livingston owner, German, he was on the same flight. He stepped off the flight and he turned to me, because I knew Dominic Keane really well because I covered Livingston a lot. He said, "Tony, you'll never guess where Kenny Dalglish has held Celtic's press conference for the Rangers game." And I said, "Where?" He said, "Guess." I said, "I'll never guess. Right? You're going to shock me here." and the next two words that came out his mouth, my jaw just hit the floor. I sat down at, I think we were at Florida, airport in Florida, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I sat and I just slumped in a chair. Beards Bar. And I was just like, wow. And I experienced it myself because I covered the last press conference of Kenny Dalglish's reign at Celtic Park. They were playing Dundee United, and I think Larsson came back to play in that last game of the season. And we were in the Celtic. Did we go to this? I don't think we went. It wasn't the Beards Bar or the social club, but I'm sure it was Celtic Park. And we were sitting, and fans were in beside you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would ask a question of Kenny Dalglish, and fans would say, "Don't answer that, Kenny. That's a loaded question. They've got an agenda," stuff like that. And I was a young guy at that point. I just started out in the record. I'd started in '99.
Mm-hmm.
That was quite intimidating for a young guy like myself, and you did kind of feel it, and you felt that kind of real hostility between Kenny Dalglish and the media and Celtic as a club in general, which is never the way it should be. They should always exist in tandem. Rules get broken and they get bent, and I understand that. And people, sometimes, individuals may in the club's viewpoint step out of line, but that's up to them to deal with that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But that was quite an intimidating atmosphere, and I don't think anybody emerged with any credit from that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Let alone Kenny Dalglish and Celtic. But to put that kind of pressure on the media, and now you've seen the advent of fan media
Mm-hmm.
getting into pressers and all that, so which is a really good thing. I'm all for that, but I still think that fan media and Scottish mainstream media can also exist in tandem.
Mm-hmm.
They can do their respective jobs and be, and get along and be cordial with each other, and because I just feel that's a particular poor episode in Celtic's history, that Kenny Dalglish took press conferences to Beards Bar. And I just think that's conduct unbecoming of a club like Celtic, and it's conduct unbecoming of a man holding that high esteemed office of the manager of Celtic Football Club. And I get what he was trying to do, bring the club closer to the fans, but there are many better ways and means of doing that. I just think that's a real low in Celtic's history, taken, regardless of what you feel about any media person. I don't think they should have to run that gauntlet of turning up at pubs and social clubs and get a verbal abuse for only trying to do the job. Journalists like yourself and myself, we're only trying to do a job, and it's hard at times, and just do an honest job, and honest graft. There's a lot of wonderful journalists out there.
Mm-hmm.
They're normal people. They have families.
Mm-hmm.
They need to earn money, and it's regardless of football fans' particular prejudices or whatever they want to call it towards certain members of the media, then that's fine. But I don't think Kenny Dalglish did anything to resolve any kind of conflict that Celtic had with the media at that time.
No, absolutely not. And as you say, it spoke of this kind of disconnect that Dalglish had, and Celtic behind the scenes are a shambles at this point, to be honest. I mean, it ends in a trophy. There's very few times where a project like this that falls flat ends with a trophy. But I want to touch on, like, after this, because it's clear that Dalglish hasn't taken the job permanently, and Alan Mcdonald and his kind of crew of kind of people in the boardroom, they're looking to bring in a new manager. They famously go and speak to Gus Hiddink at Real Betis, but Dermot Desmond is, and this is the first time we Dermot Desmond kind of gets involved, I would say, and he's working on a different list of candidates, and he speaks to Martin O'Neill. What was your kind of opinion at the time? Who did you think was going to get the job? Like, what was that like to kind of cover when like there was this disconnect? Because one paper's get Gus Hiddink's going to be the next manager, and then you've got another one saying Dermot Desmond's going to appoint this person himself, and Neil wasn't really mentioned until later on, but that showed you just how split this situation is.
What it did show me was that they were determined on getting the next appointment right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Gus Hiddink, Gus Chase,
Mm-hmm.
I think the Daily Record sent a journalist over to find them, and I think other papers did the same, and it turned out to be a red herring,
Mm-hmm.
and he wasn't getting the job. But I think at that particular time, Celtic supporters was just delighted that the club were finally showing some ambition,
Mm-hmm.
and dragged themselves as far away from they could from the past few months of the Barnes experience and the Kenny Dalglish Beards Bar experience. Because bearing in mind that the Beards Bar was before a Rangers game, which they get cuffed 4-0 in, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, so everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, did go wrong, and a poor black kind of period in the history of the club, and best forgotten, which is why it's never really spoken about, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you do something like this.
Do you think that's because Neil come in and completely turned it round? Do you think that's because it?
And I think the whole fact that, as I said there, something had to give. People at the top had to get involved, because the club was lurching from one crisis to another, and
Mm-hmm.
being, a laughing stock. Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Speak by Inverness Cali, people with a right good laugh, taking press conference to bars, journalists being escorted from premises, stuff like that. It's just no way to conduct your business. But they were doing it. They were basically airing their dirty linen in public, and I think Celtic as a club, just it was a road that they should never have gone down, but they did. And then I think Dermot Desmond had sort of said enough is enough, and personally oversaw the employment of the new manager. And then when Martin O'Neill came in, you got the feeling there was Celtic meant business.
Mm-hmm.
When he stood in the steps that
day,
he famously said, "I will do everything in my power to bring success to this football club." And there's a voice, you can hear a lone voice that shouts, "That's all we want, Martin."
Mm-hmm.
That summed up the feelings of the fans.
Yeah.
All they wanted was a team in the park that won trophies and was successful. All the rest, all the kind of background noise and turmoil and strife, they could do without it. And it's quite telling, that, because it's quite a pivotal moment in Scottish football history in terms of the seismic shift and balance and power
mm-hmm.
that happened after that. And everybody got on board. Larson and Lambert got on board, and the players that he brought in, Sutton, Hartson, Lennon, he had Petrov there, he had Moravchik, and he moulded them into this team that ultimately, within 4 years of John Barnes leaving Celtic in the UEFA Cup final.
I know, it's crazy.
European final in 33 years, since 1970. So you look at that and you think that happened 4 years after the turmoil of the Barnes, Dalglish era. So you see yourself, and again, so what went on during that era that we didn't know about? Why did it take something so monumentally significant in bringing in, Martin O'Neill, for it all to be flipped on its head?
Mm-hmm.
When the raw ingredients were there, where a lot of the players, Martin brought in a lot of players and he spent a lot of money, and he was granted maybe a lot of tools that some other Celtic managers weren't fortunate. But I think that they'd had enough, and they just kind of decided that they meant business, or that certainly Dermot Desmond did.
Mm-hmm. It's a really fascinating period in Celtic's history, and it's been a pleasure to go through it with you, Anthony. Thank you very much for coming on.
Pleasure in mine, Scott. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much to everyone that's tuned in. We will be back on the next episode of The Rewind as we look at Vladimir Romanov's time as Hearts owner. Thank you very much to everyone who's tuned in. Really appreciate it.